Good morning, Year 10. I hope you're well and having a lovely day. This is Mr. Sousa welcoming you to today's lesson. Please could you write the date and the title of Fin de Fête? And also could you complete the do now? Write down 3 quotations from A Broken Appointment from memory. For at least one of those quotations, do a quotation explosion to explore language and structure devices. So for this lesson you will need a printout of the poem that you can annotate, or as usual I will upload on ClassCharts a Word version and a PDF. If you are unable to access a printer, you can simply annotate the Word version using the functions on Word. You need a pencil for thoughts and ideas and different coloured pens or highlighters. So Fin de Fête, what can we work out from the title? What do we associate with the words fin and fête? What kind of tone are we expecting from a poem with that title? Pause the video for a couple of minutes to jot down answers to these questions. Okay, so fin is French for end, you may have seen it in some movies. Fête is French for party or celebration. The rough translation of this phrase is the party's over. What might this suggest about the relationship? And what kind of tone are we expecting from a poem with this title? So maybe something sad, mournful, regretful, bitter, nostalgic. So nostalgia is when you're looking back on good memories fondly. So when you're thinking about all the wonderful times we had in E3 this year, that would be nostalgia. Of course, that's bearing in mind you're thinking fondly of them, which I'm sure you are. Reminiscent, so again, that's thinking about the past, and perhaps a mixture of these feelings. So please could you make a note of what's on the slide? Okay, so Fin de Fête, first reading. Apologies to Alex, I may not be pronouncing these words correctly, but I'm sure he'll know, but probably the rest of you won't, hopefully. Okay, so first reading. Sweetheart, for such a day one mustn't grudge the score. Here then, it's all to pay. It's good night at the door. Good night and good dreams to you. Do you remember the picture book thieves who left 2 children sleeping in a wood the long night through, and how the birds came down and covered them with leaves? So you and I should have slept. But now, oh, what a lonely head, with just the shadow of a waving bough in the moonlight over your bed. Give yourself time to read over the poem a couple of times more, getting to grips with its content. It's okay not to understand every word or idea at this point. You're just trying to get a feel for the poem. And then could you jot down some answers to the following questions? What is the mood of the poem? Who is speaking? Who are they speaking to? And how do they feel? So, it's clear that the speaker had the specific intended audience here. The poem starts by addressing them as sweetheart, and the reference to you and I shows that they were formerly close, indicating that the poem is spoken to a former lover. The tone is trickier to identify. Is the word sweetheart genuine or sarcastic? The repetition of good perhaps indicates the latter. It's forced niceness, perhaps, to make a point about how things should have been, in contrast to what they are. Most of the debate with this poem is around why the party may have ended, and therefore how that affects the tone. Some possible interpretations are: is it because the relationship's over, so the party is a metaphor for the relationship? Is it that the lover has died and the speaker feels left alone to cope with it? Or is it that they both want to be physically close together, but they are sleeping apart? So it's a common belief that Mew, who wrote the poem, was a lesbian and could be expressing her unfulfilled desires. Or it could simply be that there were 2 people who wanted to be together romantically, but there were certain barriers in the way. So it could have been sexuality, or it could have been perhaps one of them was married, or another reason. So those are some potential interpretations of the poem. So now let's talk about structure. The middle section of the poem, separated out by the dashes, often confuses first-time readers. It's an allusion to the fairy tale, Babes in the Wood. The story tells of two small children left in the care of an uncle and aunt after their parents' death. The uncle gives the children to ruffians to be killed in order to acquire their inheritance, telling his wife they are being sent to London for their upbringing. The murderers fall out, and the milder of the two kills the other. He tells the children he will return with provisions, but they do not see him again. The children, wandering alone in the woods, die and are covered by leaves by the birds. Like many morality tales, the story continues with a description of the retribution befalling the uncle. In sanitized versions, the children are bodily taken to heaven. The story ends with a warning to those who have to take care of orphans and others' children, not to inflict God's wrath upon themselves. This pastoral allusion hints at childhood innocence, the idea that young people can be unaware of danger lurking ahead, much like young lovers. Now that you understand the speaker's situation and the tone of the poem, you need to read through it again, this time with a pencil in hand, ready to annotate your ideas. What can you pick out about how these feelings are presented? What devices does Mew use to convey her feelings? On the second reading, don't forget to comment on form and structure as well as the language used. Is there a regular rhyme scheme and meter? What are the topics of each stanza? Consider punctuation choices. So pause the video in order to make your own notes. This time I'm going to take you through the poem, mentioning key details you could annotate. On this third reading, you can add to your copy of the poem in pen, confirming your own pencil ideas and adding to it as well. Mew was said to bridge Victorian and modernist poetry. The poem has an ABAB rhyme scheme, common to Victorian lyrical poetry, but it has an irregular line length which makes the structure modernist. Mew is breaking with tradition to present a darker view of romance. The poem has 3 stanzas. The middle section focuses on the literary allusion to Bathed in the Wood, with a question to the audience. Do you remember? This question links back to a shared past with the speaker and shows that time has passed for them both. It creates a reminiscent tone. Okay, so this is the detailed analysis. Could you please note down anything that you haven't written down already? So, sweetheart, it's a term of endearment, suggesting closeness. The comma following it places emphasis on this address, and so hints that this closeness is in the past. Grudge, a persistent feeling of ill will or resentment resulting from a past injury or insult. Grudge the score is a metaphor of competition and contest, hints at past conflict, but it's at an end, all to play. Door, symbolic of a close or a boundary, so that links back to this boundary that's preventing them from having a relationship. Does the door symbolize death, that the lover has passed away? Does it symbolize another barrier, as we've talked about before, that prevents them from continuing or potentially having a relationship? So you've got repetition of good 3 times. This potentially indicates sarcasm through overuse, or an alternative interpretation is that the speaker feels very kindly to the person that they're directing this poem to. So it could be sarcasm, or it could be genuine. We don't know. So we've got a fairy tale with a sinister ending, not the pastoral ideal it first appears to be, and there's also use of Gothic imagery. And as we talked about before, this is an allusion to Bathed in the Wood, referring to loss of innocence, but also reflective and reminiscent tone, suggesting shared memories and experiences. There are longer lines in this section, and it could suggest wanting to elongate the memory. And so when you think fondly about something, so maybe think back to Eva Smith remembering her relationship with Gerald, you often want to stretch it out, because remember Eva Smith went to the beach, the seaside, for 2 months after their affair ended. So she wanted to really stretch it out. So here we've got, so you and I should have slept. contrast of what should have been togetherness to what is actually the case, now alone. So shorter lines back in the present to show separation. And we've also got Gothic imagery again in the stanza, lonely head, shadow and moonlight, which gives a sense of isolation and perhaps hints of death or a graveyard. So those are the detailed notes. Please could you make sure you've written them all down. As well as annotating each poem we read this term, we're going to make sure to capture the key ideas in our exercise books. What you choose to record will be different for each of you because you should be choosing the ideas that you would feel confident writing about in an exam situation. What you should capture at this stage may later go on flashcards for you to use when you revise. Your notes should include reference to the speaker and their feelings or perspectives, at least 3 quotations, literary terminology, points you can make about language and structure, and consideration of key themes. You can choose from this list or choose your own. Loss, pain, desire, longing, nature, distance, isolation, confrontation, reflection, recovery, time, and change. Okay, so you're going to spend the last 5 minutes in the lesson making sure you know the quotations you've chosen really well. You could do this by look, cover, write, check, do your coding, or saying the quotations aloud and testing yourself. So could you pause the video for 5 minutes to do this now? Okay, so that brings us to the end of today's lesson. I hope you found it interesting and somewhat enjoyable, and I look forward to seeing you next time for speech writing again.